Native Americans have such a rich history, with stories making it into history books and classes. However, not all accounts have been exhausted, and some have been wrongly narrated. A good number of items, places, games, and traditions may be traced to Native Americans. You may be unaware of the rich history, especially since only some things have been covered in history books. In today's video, we'll look at 15 interesting facts about Native Americans that you won't find in a history book. Without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Welcome to Untold History Guy, where you can find fun, fascinating, and sometimes shocking chronicles of history. Join us as we journey back and uncover the untold truths of the past. Number 1. They spoke more than 300 languages. One of the interesting facts about Native Americans is the numerous languages they spoke. Before colonization, they had over 300 languages spoken across the US and 500 worldwide. Some of these languages are non-existent due to the government's assimilation policies. At the start of the 1800s, the Native Americans were displaced from their homes to reserves. As for children, they were placed in Indian boarding schools and schooled in English. Later on, in 1972, Congress passed the Indian Education Act, which allowed Native American tribes to learn and teach their languages. More development was done in 1990, whereby Congress passed the Native American Languages Act. This act gives support for Native American language revitalization and preservation. Number 2. Artifacts belonging to Native Americans are protected legally. During one of your adventures on tribal or federal land, you may come across an interesting artifact. You may be tempted to keep it, but you should know that it may be against the law. The Native Graves Protection and Repatriation Act acknowledges that particular items belong to Indian tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and lineal descendants. This Protection Act covers objects of cultural patrimony, funerary objects, human remains, and sacred objects. Instead, they store these artifacts in museums where they belong. Number 3. They had diverse housing. One of the various misconceived truths of the Native Americans is their housing. Hollywood shows they all lived in teepees, which is far from the truth. There are several Native American tribes and they have different cultures. Those who stayed in teepees were plain Indians, while those in the Mesa Verde region stayed in cliffs. Native Americans who lived in the Iroquois Nation had longhouses, while tribes in Taos stayed in pueblos. Number 4. Each tribe of the Native Americans had a different culture. Your history teacher may have failed to let you know that there are numerous distinct Native American tribes. The few which you may have heard of are Sioux, Cherokee, and Mohawk. However, there are hundreds more, about 600. Contrary to what we think, these tribes are not similar culturally. For instance, they speak different languages and have other religious practices and origin stories. There are organizations and institutions which help these tribes to preserve important cultural heritage and their historic lands. Number 5. They had female warriors. You have watched several movies and seen pictures of Native American warriors. What you may have noticed is that they are mostly male warriors. On the other hand, they portray females as stay-at-home wives or daughters. What they don't show and print in books is that there were also female warriors who went into war along with males. There was one female warrior who fought in the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Battle of the Rosebud. They referred to her as Buffalo Calf Road Woman, a member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. Also, she could take out Custer with one final deadly blow. There are several other female Native American warriors that history books fail to mention. Number 6. Popcorn invention can be traced to Native Americans. You may have never thought about popcorn and how it came to be. It'll interest you to know that many years back, it was the Native Americans who first domesticated the type of maize which makes popcorn. Popcorn artifacts date back about 6,700 years ago and were discovered in Peru. Number 7. In 1828, the first publication of Native American newspapers began. Before colonization, Native Americans could only communicate orally. In 1828, good news came around as they got their first ever published newspaper. It came to be from the efforts of Sequoyah, who was part of the Cherokee Nation. For 12 years, he went through the process of developing a writing technique meant to help his people in reading and writing. The developed syllabary represented specific sounds of the Cherokee language. In 1828, they published the first edition of Cherokee Phoenix. The first bilingual newspaper was printed in Cherokee and English in the U.S. Number 8. There was more information about Squanto than what schools teach. When you read Native American history, you most likely have read about Squanto. If not, he played a role in helping the Pilgrims of the Mayflower survive. Something happened to Squanto which helped him save the Pilgrims. An English explorer, George Weymouth, kidnapped Squanto and took him back to Britain to act as an exhibit for his financial backers. During this kidnap, Squanto was able to learn English. Later, George Weymouth returned Squanto to his home. Shortly after, an explorer, Thomas Blunt, abducted and sold him as an enslaved person in Spain. Not long after, they returned him. Sadly, he found his whole tribe, the Patuxet, had died from smallpox. Following this, he contacted Mayflower passengers and helped them translate from Native to English and vice versa. Number 9. Native Americans played a role in the origin of hockey. If you love playing hockey, you may have to thank the Native American Assiniboine, Sioux, and Foxes. These tribes played a similar game which they called shinny. If you've played the game, there are details of the shinny game which inspired hockey. They used a buckskin ball which they tossed around on the ground. Similar to a hockey stick but less refined, they used a curved stick to push the buckskin ball. During winter, they played shinny over ice. For this game to develop into what it is today, white settlers reinvented it and gave it a different name, hockey. Number 10. Various terms such as skunk, chipmunk, and pecan came from an Algonquin language. It would amaze you to find out that some English words which are widely known have a Native American origin. By the time the English language reached North America, they had already developed various languages they had spoken for thousands of years. For instance, the word skunk was part of the Algonquin language in the Massachusetts tribe, which meant fox-like animal. Another term is chipmunk, which meant red squirrel. The Algonquin language had the words caribou, moose, and raccoon that later the English language borrowed. Apart from names of animals, there are geographical terms with a North American origin. For instance, Connecticut and Wyoming are Algonquin, which means land of vast plains and land on the long tidal river. Number 11. The Iroquois used trick-or-treating before it became a thing. It may be that time of year when kids will dress in costumes and go door to door asking for treats. The Iroquois had an annual winter festival whereby kids would go around houses and families collecting gifts. These children would be in the company of an older woman who would guide them to different families. Number 12. They developed and started the use of anesthetics. Before medicine evolved and developed anesthetics, Native Americans had already started its use. They used Jimson weed as an organic anesthetic. They would grind the root to form a thick paste resembling plaster. It would be applied to external injuries such as bruises and cuts. Apart from Jimson weed, they used opium, datura, coca leaves, and peyote. They would chew the leaves of these plants for loss of consciousness and sensation during surgery. Number 13. The Native Americans were the first to play lacrosse. Lacrosse was a sport initially played by North Americans, especially the Choctaw. When the Europeans came to North America, they spotted the game they took to Europe. Initially, the Native American men played it by tossing a ball into the air with sticks. Once in Europe, they modified the game to what it is now, professional and collegiate. North Americans invented various games, such as relay races and tug-of-war. It's only that Europeans gave the games different names. Number 14. Native Americans developed a technique that created a red dye. Dyes can be traced back to Native Americans, as they developed a technique to remove red dye from dried cactus-eating insects. It became a sensation that attracted the attention of British people, who adopted the use of dye to color their uniforms during the Revolutionary War. The name of the dye was cochineal. The insects would be killed, dried, then crushed, and the dye harvested. Apart from cochineal, the natives introduced indigo dye, which originated from a green plant that produced a yellow substance in contact with water, and blue when exposed to oxygen. Number 15. Christian missionaries had an assumption that totem poles were symbols of native gods. Native Americans had totems that they placed in front of their houses. The totem poles symbolized family status. They had symbols in the form of animals which had a significant meaning for each family that put the totems up. Other times, the totems were memorials for ancestors. Most of the totems were colorful with unique carvings. When the Christian missionaries came to their lands, they believed that the totems symbolized native gods. So what do you think about Native Americans' history? Which of these facts are you surprised to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our channel.